It is January 4th, 2021. Ryan Ray alongside the Dragon Feeder himself, Chris Fenton. Chris,
Oh,
how is it? How was your new year? Did we do a show? Is this our first show of the year or second? I can't remember now.
this is our second show of the year, but this is like the first one where people might actually be, online doing stuff. I thought we had a lot of fun sort of talking about things, working out the kinks and sort of this idea of some dialogue between the two of us and seeing how engaged people get. And, now that everybody's back into the swing of things, it'll be interesting to see what kind of comments and commentary we get from people that are checking this out, because we really do want to formulate the best sort of dialogue in a way that is both entertaining, educational, brings out ideas, whether good or bad, and allows, I think, extra additive dialogue on the social media of both of us, and allows us to come back on the next show and talk about that stuff.
Yeah, and so this show is live. We might end up putting in a podcast form at some point. But if you follow at the Dragon Feeder or at Ryan Ray Sr. on Twitter, you can see when we go live. We don't have a set time just because of scheduling conflicts, but we try to go live several times a week. So anyways, okay. So Chris, I have to ask you this question. You are under oath here. Is Jack Ma at your residence right now?
Jack Ma is actually under the table I'm talking on. He is paying me just 1% of his fortune, so it's actually very lucrative to me to keep him in hiding here. No, but seriously, this is a topic that I think we've brought up on every show up until now. Jack Ma definitely has done something that you're allowed to do here in the United States, which is exercise freedom of speech rights and be critical of the government or the regulatory bodies in China in regards to something he disagreed with. And now he's seeing the repercussions of living in China versus living in the United States.
So there's two things or a couple things I want to unpack. The first thing is, and I always like to bring this up when you're talking about U.S. China, is that we have to look at this story. There's a lot of things to unpack, but in the West, the primary thing for me is this is why restrictions on speech are so dangerous, because this is where it can and will go. So the China issue aside, as Americans, we have to realize, we talk about the story, it's a China story. Okay, that's fine. But in the U.S., before we start restricting speech, remember, this is what happens when you restrict speech, is that you get to spots to all of a sudden where you're doing these things. Now, I was talking to someone over the weekend, and they said, if I was him, I'd be out of there. Just spitballing here, he has the money. If you had a bet, I know you don't know, but if you had a bet, is it more likely that the CCP has him detained or under wraps somewhere, maybe not in a prison, but house arrest, or he's fled the country and he's actually hiding out somewhere?
Yeah, I think, look, no one knows. I can't tell you what I think is actually happening, because I'd be an idiot to say that I can know more than anybody else. I mean, this is the CCP we're dealing with. They're very secretive on how they deal with this stuff. I can tell you from history, though, some very influential people have been caught in the same kind of crossfire, and they didn't leave either. I mean, just recently, in sort of a high-profile entertainment kind of way, was Fan Bingbing. She was found guilty of tax fraud, and she disappeared for, I think, close to a year, and she was making well over 100 million US a year. So that gives you lots of ability to leave and flee a country. But I think what happens is they take those passports away and they put you under sort of a watch and a house arrest or whatever it is, and you can't leave. And the same thing we saw with, for instance, one of the first government officials that crossed Xi Jinping, which was Bo Xilai back in, I think it was 2012 or 13. You saw Dylan Wando, which we talked about, which owns 40% of AMC Theaters. That's run by Chairman Wang Jinlin, who also disappeared for a while and has never left the country since. We see this countless times. And in fact, we're probably witnessing it again today with these reports of the filmmaker behind Wolf Warrior 2 now being detained for tax evasion. So this is a really, sort of common occurrence that happens. What exactly is going on is out there for speculation. He might just appear and suddenly go, hey, I was down in, an island in the Maldives or something, but I doubt that.
Do you think the U.S. should offer asylum for people like this? the dissidents who are in China who have spoken out, to allow them the ability to leave the country, to come to the U.S. Of course, they got to get out of the country, but once they get out, they can come here and have a safe haven, if you will.
Yeah, well, I mean, you do have Joseph Tsai here, who was one of Jack's partners, who actually owns the Brooklyn Nets. I haven't heard him say anything about this situation. It will be interesting to see if he does speak out about it, because he is going to be under the national security law ramifications if he does say something critical. So my belief is that he'll probably stay crickets on this. But if you look at, I guess, just the nefarious sort of skeptical point of view of how somebody like Jack Ma gets the wealth and acquires the power and is able to build a company the way he did, I would imagine there were a lot of or un-American things that he was involved with in order to get to that point, right? So is it technically somebody we want to offer asylum to? Could he switch sides and maybe help us as somebody who could give us a leading edge in this strategic competitive relationship we have with China? Yeah, possibly. It's hard to tell, but I don't know what the right answer is. And if he was here, I'm curious to see how the government would react, especially under the new Biden administration.
Well, if you look at someone like Edward Snowden, he's in Russia right now, and Snowden is in Russia mainly because he kind of got stuck there. I think by all accounts, it was like he planned to go to Russia. That's just how his escape landed him there. He wanted to go to South America, if I remember correctly. But him in Russia allows him to sit in Russia and critique the U.S. government over and over and over again without impunity. And so he has almost more power in Russia than he does in the U.S. Because if he's in the U.S., he'd go to trial, probably be convicted, go to jail, whatever you think of, no issue aside. So bringing Jack Ma over, he would lose his business interest in China. That would probably go away, but then he could have the ability to come on CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, the Dragon Feeder, and talk about all of these issues publicly over and over and over and over and over again. And that's pretty powerful. And so, what I don't understand about these rich kind of oligarchs in China is they have to know this is not controversial, that their day is coming. Their day is coming. So which makes you wonder, does Jack Ma and some of those types feel like there's a revolution that will of local support that they can kind of tap into? It doesn't seem this could be the case. Why do you think they kind of overstay their welcome? Do they just kind of, they're in a bubble? They don't really realize that it's coming. What's your take on that? I know you don't know, just because for us, it's pretty obvious. Like, hey, they're going to come for you and take you down one day.
Yeah, I think my guess is that it just comes down to human behavior and human instinct, and just the way, as you gain power and you gain the ability to surround yourself with yes people and bubble yourself, you start to forget exactly who your real boss is. You forget to bring an apple a day to the principal or to the teacher or to the CCP, because you start to think that you're actually bigger than them. And when that happens, that becomes a real problem for those that actually speak out, because they think they're protected. They think they're larger than the government that gave them that position. And that's where they get into hot water. I mean, I think back about Wang Jinlin, the chairman of Dailan Wanda. I mean, there's a guy who mandated everybody that worked at the company refer to him as the chairman. He would play a basketball game, I believe it was every Friday night, mandating all the executives were there and mandating that they allow him to score or shoot freely without any sort of defense around him. And this is somebody who ended up speaking out and making himself look bigger than the government itself, and they cracked down on him.
Yeah, and one other thing I've thought about is, from Ma's perspective, to get back in the good graces, he essentially would have to give up what made him who he was, right? He'd have to go and just to be a shill, if you will. He might be okay with that, but he would have to kind of backtrack on all things he said. He'd have control of his company, but it'd be that the CCP might roll back some of the regulatory stuff they're talking about, but behind the scenes they'd put the pressure on him. And so he's in a tough spot here. I mean, because what do you do? And that's why I'm curious about the U.S. or someone else or Australia, our buddies in Australia, offering him asylum, because that kind of sticks it to the CCP. They would not like that, but you bring him on all the cable news shows and you have him talk about all the stuff he does, the good and the bad. Because as you mentioned, there's a lot of nefarious business deals that have happened that he benefited from. He can talk about that and expose that, because unless he believes there's going to be a leadership change at the top, his days as influential in China are over. Unless he, again, takes kind of the kiss the ring route.
Well, I would also add to that his success might have been his own demise too, even if he didn't come out and speak critically of the government. Because when you look at Alibaba and their streaming platform and their reach into sports and their reach into obviously e-com, but then also through Ant Financial and the breadth and scope of what they do financially in that market for everyday transactions. That company, what he built, was actually becoming as powerful as the government itself. You could argue we're seeing the same sort of push and pull here in the United States, where we're seeing, whether it's Facebook or Twitter or Amazon or some of these huge tech behemoths actually have so much leverage over what everyday people do every single day, that you could argue they might be just as strong and as effective or even more effective than the government here. So if you're a CCP member and you're seeing a company gain that type of influence that might be competing with your own leadership influence, you're starting to think, well, wait a minute, how do we abate this? How do we mitigate what's going on here? So even if Jack didn't come out and say something critical, I wouldn't be surprised if they started to clamp down on how big his empire was growing.
Any thoughts on how this might impact Alibaba? Alibaba obviously has it's one of those things where it's kind of hard to tell what percentage of the American population knows where things come from Alibaba. But if you're into the kind of the drop shipping business, the e-commerce business, you're trying to do stuff like that, then Alibaba is a big resource for you. Any idea how this might impact that or change those dynamics? Because, obviously you had, kind of Jack Ma, and then his group kind of influential. Now you're going to shift that to more of a government ran thing. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I would say number one is, first of all, here in the United States of America, this should be another wake up call. I don't know how many we need, but the fact is these companies, whether they are totally owned by the government in China or whether they're state-owned enterprises, partially owned or fully owned, or they're just private companies that can be shut down in a moment's notice by the government, that's got to be the wake-up call to our capital markets here. And I know every Wall Street lobbyist is going to hate me for saying this. We need to protect U.S. investors and retail investors and mom and pop investors from these type of companies that literally could go to zero overnight or be completely fraudulent with their accounting, or various other things could be going wrong, or in fact, they're spying on us here in the United States, or whatever the nefarious sort of action is going on. I would say, with what's going on right now, the ability for the government just to close down Ant from issuing an IPO, the ability for the government just to take down essentially the leader of Alibaba, we should delist these companies from the Wall Street indexes immediately. It's just way, way, way too risky to have them here listed in our capital markets for the average U.S. investor to invest in.
Yeah, I think it's definitely something that we have to re-examine. Comment from a viewer: it certainly sucks for Jack Ma. I would never wish anything bad, but this is a great test for Biden. And that's one of the things we were talking about before, which was, should the U.S. offer him asylum? What should the U.S. do? Because it's a slippery slope. But I do think the Biden administration, how they will handle these things, it's going to be interesting to see. Of course, Biden is still not in, so we still have a little bit of time. But any
By the
final
way,
thoughts?
Man United, I like the handle, although I'm more of a Chelsea fan myself, but that's all right. That's a good comment. And yeah, it is going to be a good test for Biden.
Yeah. Any more on Jack Ma before we move to Wolf Warrior 2?
No, but I think Wolf Warrior 2 is a really interesting one too, because it goes straight from Jack Ma. First of all, it goes straight from this crackdown of influence, right? And people that are influential in that market, in the populist point of view. Jack Ma obviously created an empire that the average Chinese person comes across every single day and utilizes. When you go after a producer, filmmaker of one of the biggest hit movies of all time, which means it's in the cultural fabric of that populace, that means there is a thought that this particular person might be gaining too much influence just in the cultural fabric of the populace, and that potentially could be a threat to the CCP leadership. Now, we don't know for sure. Maybe there was tax swindling or some sort of fraud going on. I mean, there's always that potential, but it's always a little suspicious when this kind of stuff goes down, especially on the backs of several others at the same time. You could question whether there's actually some sort of cleansing that's ongoing right now.
Let me put it like this. Get your take on it. So working with and for not ever as an employee, but as a contractor, a vendor for large oil and gas companies, one thing that I've learned is that every so often they'll come in and you'll say, "Where's Chris at?" And like, "Oh, he's gone. He got fired." Like, "What did he do?" And like, "Well, Chris was taking money for this, or he was having an affair with the secretary, or whatever." And I'm not you, Chris, but another Chris, or Bob, or and you'll say,
"Good."
Yeah, they'll say, "Oh wow," you'll be like, "Well, when this happened?" Like, "Oh, it's been going on for 3 years." And it's like, "Well, so what really happened?" "Oh, well, his project was behind schedule." And so what you'll find with these big corporations is they know that you're messing up, and they let you mess up and let you build up your kind of all these bad things against you. So when they want to fire you for cause, they don't have to deal with your mess up over here about a project or something behind schedule. They can go for legitimate things and say, "This is what you did wrong." And I think when you look at these stories, you have to kind of keep that in mind. As you say, they might be mad about something else, but they know that this has been going on. They let it slide, and then they come lay the hammer down.
Well, and what's even more interesting is if you look at Jack Ma, he was sort of put on a pedestal as the figurehead of this capitalism with Chinese characteristics type of movement that they had there. And he was really the front man for that. And then you look at Wolf Warrior, the movie, was sort of put at the forefront of this nationalistic pride, right? Because in a way, the movie, I didn't see Wolf Warrior 2, but I'm assuming it's like Wolf Warrior 1, which was the Chinese version of Rambo. And very sort of patriotic type of film. Chinese save the day. They kill the bad guys, the imperialists from the West, blah, 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 blah. Not only was it actually a source of nationalistic pride, but it also became sort of the foundation of this idea of them spreading their soft power and actually even harder word power influence across the world through this Wolf Warrior diplomacy movement. So there's so much weird symbolic stuff going on with this too, which I think probably plays into a lot of what's going on in some of the decisions the CCP is making.
So what do you think about this movie? I know you haven't seen it, but have you heard anybody talk about it? Was there some messaging in the movie that drew special attention to it? Because it seemed like it's, like you said, kind of a 2.0 propaganda film. And so like I could understand if it was, some movie that portrayed, Donald Trump taking down Xi Jinping and it slipped out through the cracks and it made it to the film industry. Like, oh my gosh, they're going to come lay the hammer down. But this doesn't seem to be a film like that.
No, I think this was a movie. I mean, no movie makes the kind of money that movie made without the government fully supporting it, right? And not only does the government support just it being monetized, but it also puts a lot of effort into making sure people know about it and want to go see it. So I think there was just a lot of, rally around the flag, nationalistic, patriotic pride involved with a movie that was well constructed, had big set pieces, was really fun to watch in a communal setting like in a movie theater, and that's why it made so much money. I don't think what's going on right now with this particular filmmaker producer, and once again I'm speculating, has anything to do with the content of the film. If anything, that content of the film was probably a good protection.
Well, that's why I'm confused, I guess, because if you have someone who's kind of towing the company line and they're putting out films and the films are getting good reviews and they're good propaganda pieces, why go crack down on them? I can understand Jack Ma because he's over here being critical of you, but if they're putting out what you want, why not encourage them to do more of the same?
Well, I ask you that question. You have an idea about it? I mean, how would you speculate? I mean, we may find out that he did say something. Who knows?
I think the analogy I was saying a minute ago, which is they've done something, whatever that something is, and they've let them make, avoid taxes. They probably already avoided the taxes or whatever, and so they're using that as a reason to crack down on them. I don't know what they've done though. That's why the story's fascinating to me, because it seems to be like their company, company men, if you will. They're going to go and push out the propaganda. So I don't know. It's weird. And is there the film industry? So from your perspective, is there a way to make better propaganda films? Like
Well,
is there a different type of propaganda that could resonate more deeply with the Chinese people?
yeah, I don't, once again, I don't think it has to do with the film itself, but I do wonder, you brought up an interesting point. If you go back to, I wonder if there's something we can learn from our own history here in the United States, but if you go back to sort of the mobsters, controlling Chicago or whatever it was back in I don't know my history great, but the Al Capone stuff and all that, it seemed like there was this complacent sort of relationship between government, law officials, and the mobsters, and just letting this go on. And then eventually they overplay their hand, and the government says we got to go after them, and they end up getting them for like tax evasion instead of all the other crazy stuff they were doing. So I guess from our own history we could look at sort of slight apple and orange comparisons and go, wow, well, somebody just crossed somebody in the wrong way, and now that's what we're seeing is the repercussions for that.
Any idea how big of a film studio this is in China? So in other words, if these guys were to go away, would it be a big deficit in the film industry, or are they kind of a small time player? If you don't know, that's fine. I'm just trying to put it in perspective. Is this like, if Disney folded up tomorrow, or, I don't know, the big movie names, MGM, 20th Century Fox, I don't know, you're the movie guy, not me. So I'm just trying to think, is there a comparable to understand how this might translate into the larger movie industry in China?
I mean, look, I don't know exactly how big it is, but none of these individual players are really going to rock the system in any way. I mean, if you're looking for anything that's in that entertainment space that really has systemic damage potential, that would be the bats, Baidu, Alibaba, Tencent. When you look at these individual players in the movie space, I mean, these are billion, maybe few $billion US companies or smaller. They're usually not capable of taking down any sort of system or even creating an industry-wide problem. We did see a crackdown with the tax evasion issues go throughout the whole movie industry space, and that did cause a lot of damage to the local industry. But that was because dozens, if not more, companies were taken down during that process. So it was a major component of the whole marketplace in general.
Okay, I saw you shared this, I think it was today, from the South China Morning Post. America's ideological dilemma with China. To pursue Cold War 2.0, Washington will have to explain away how Chinese communism has been as good or even better than American capitalism at delivering economic success and abundance for its people, as well as much needed growth for the world economy. And I think I don't have your comment pulled up here, but you had a kind of a pithy remark to that. What are your thoughts on this piece in general? And I think you had some issues with it.
Well, first of all, I invite everybody to read it because it's actually the kind of narrative that even we heard on the congressional delegation trip last August that I was on from pretty much every level of government over there. Which was, communism seems to be the better form of government for our 1.4 billion people. Look at how many people we brought out of poverty. Look at how great we are at building infrastructure, et cetera, et cetera. And that was pre-COVID. And this op-ed actually pulls us into the pandemic and how much better their government was at handling the virus, getting the virus, the vaccine out there, helping out other countries, et cetera, et cetera. So they're just bringing the narrative that much farther. I think for me, there's always a really smart reason to read those pieces because, and I don't like to tweet this stuff out because I know everybody will attack me, but there's actually some good points that they make in there about the way their system of government happens to work good for 1.4 billion people. By far and away, I don't think that's the system of government we want here, nor should we stop trying to push our system of government over there. But I thought the most eye-opening part of it, really, to me, was the fact that the South China Morning Post published it, right? Like that used to be the sort of free bastion of press and journalism in that part of the country or in that part of the world. And I'm saying that because I didn't really put Hong Kong and China as the same country. The Global Times, for instance, was always the mouthpiece in English of the CCP. Now it seems like there's a lot of influence in Beijing coming into the South China Morning Post. And I think that op-ed is just sort of the beginning of that. And I'm curious to see if we're going to see a lot more of it.
Yeah. So I'm kind of torn over this because you're starting to see, and I have a real frustration with American commentators, not talking about you, but like the think tank types and the really educated, sophisticated types, talking about how China has handled the pandemic. And I won't say names this show, maybe next show, but I was listening to a guy the other day, and he was saying, China understands that they have to have workforce, you have to have healthy people, and therefore they locked everything down and it worked. It's like, okay, right, I get the logic, but there's more to it at play than just the lockdown or not lockdown. There's more at play than just that. The reason they can lock down is because the same reason Jack Ma is freaking hiding right now. It's a lot more involved. The other thing is, in any industry that tracks the trade numbers with China, so you're talking about soybeans, production, GDP, whatever, anything outside of just regular commentary, everyone always says you can't trust the numbers. You can't trust the numbers. What are the numbers? We don't know. Why the medical community is assuming that the China COVID numbers are accurate is astonishing to me. There is no other industry that takes their numbers. We talk about them. We kind of say, well, this is what they're saying, but we also say, I don't know. Is it true? Maybe. How close is it? We'll find out. The fact that we take COVID numbers as gospel is the most ludicrous thing I've ever heard in my entire life. And anyone that is in the medical field that does that should not be able to speak on medical issues in the future because they are promoting propaganda. And so there's a great piece this weekend talking about how China, like back in March, just moved forward from COVID. And they locked down, they moved forward. And they've just kind of let it play its course, and they've just kind of ignored it. And if you look at New Zealand, I'll stop here. You look at New Zealand; they had very restrictive shutdowns, very small island, and they opened back up, and they had to shut back down again because COVID got back there again. If New Zealand cannot lock it out of New Zealand, then China did not lock it out of China. That's just not the case. I'm happy to talk about maybe their population responds better to COVID. I'm happy to talk about a lot of stuff. I'm not going to take the Chinese numbers as gospel in their response to it. And I think a lot of American commentators to do so undermine everything that you talk about. You talk about China. So I'll stop ranting there. And as someone says, I might get banned. Yes.
Right. Well, I'm with you 100%. I mean, I think where the numbers are definitely completely skewed, and I don't know if we'll ever know what they were, was at the beginning of this crisis, because you were counting on local officials, municipal officials, provincial officials, and everybody on the food chain up trying to cover their own asses by giving numbers that they thought could make them feel like they weren't going to get disappeared, yet also alert the central government that there was a problem. So those numbers we definitely shouldn't abide by in any sort of way. If you do talk to people, and this is all anecdotal, but if I talk to friends of mine on the ground in Beijing, it does seem like they are back to an almost normal existence in that city, which is very opposite of the 100+ days that they were in full lockdown on. So there's obviously some sort of crackdown that's occurred that's almost zeroed out the virus. And then anytime there seems to be any sort of upbreak, the numbers are so ridiculously small for 1.4 billion people. You got to question them because you'll hear, oh, there was an outbreak in Wuhan of 3 people or something like that.
I don't know what they are now. I know, I think the LA Times ran this piece. You can go look it up. There was a story back in July-ish that China was doing batch testing for COVID-19, which is not what we're doing here. We're doing individual testing. And so batch testing is a different method. I'm not the epidemiologist. You can go read some of the commentary around it, the pros and the cons. But they are doing batch testing, and that's not the same as we're doing here. And so it impacts the numbers as well. So, but that gets left out quite regularly. I'm not saying that you're doing it on purpose, but the medical community seems to omit that fact as well.
Well, and by the way, the other thing is too, if you really want to think about, the fact that we are strategic competitors in the best case scenario and possibly enemies in the other, if you're China, you're probably not all that interested in having the United States know what the real numbers are and what really did happen over there, because that just will give us an edge to try to figure out how to kick this thing and get us going back in full gear. So I would argue there's probably a competitive or even enemy side to this equation where I don't know if cooperation's even in existence at the moment. So that's a whole other reason not to abide or believe any of these numbers.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I haven't looked at it in a while. Their percentages were on par. So like their death rate was on par back a few months ago with the world's. And so I don't know what's going on now with numbers. I get a little frustrated when we look at how they've handled the lockdowns and stuff. If New Zealand can't contain the virus, then China can't contain it either. And it's just, I mean, I'm just pointing out the obvious. Now, there is some people who have speculated that the Asian kind of community responds better to these COVID type viruses. They've been around there longer. So it could just be simple as that they had that big crackdown and their immune systems are more used to it. I don't know. I'm not going to pretend to have a strong opinion on that one way or another. All I will say is I just openly reject hey, we're going to take China's numbers and we're going to run with them as that's gospel, when in no other sector do we do that. And so there's no reason to do it here, especially with what is at stake. We have seen multiple headlines now from the U.S. and from China praising how they've handled this, how their economy is stronger, how they're going to overtake the U.S. sooner. And all of those things may or may not be true, but at what cost? And the cost was they, as you have said, I have said multiple times, they have 400 million middle class that if they do not keep those people happy, they all go home. Xi Jinping, all of them, they go home. So their ability to open things back up and to respond, they had to do something or they would have a revolt on their hands.
Oh, I agree with you 100%. Well, let me, since we're running out of time here, let me ask you one final question, as it seems the United States is moving into what I think will be a week filled with a bit of rancor and, further divide. Well, so we have obviously the Georgia elections, and then we have, which by the way, who knows if they'll be over when the voting's done or whether there'll be disputes. And then we have this electoral college situation in Senate and the House coming up this week. We have various other things that seem to be dividing the country. I ask you this, if you and I and everybody that listens or watches this and everybody else who's out there talking in China and talking about the importance of addressing the China challenge to the United States, if we do our jobs right, do you think once we get past this week and maybe a few others that continue to divide the country, we can use China as a common challenge facing the United States of America to help bring us back together again? Because I feel like we need something that will do that.
That's an interesting question, because I think it will be used as the common enemy. I think what you will see is the Biden administration will point back to Trump's failures, but also they will point to China as well, because that will be an easy scapegoat. How hard that will go, I don't know, but I do think it will be one. Is it something that can be rallied around? That I'm not sure about, because as we talked about, I guess a week ago, you say you want to bring back jobs that China stole. Let's just use that term. Say China stole the jobs, we want to bring them back. That's an issue that Americans aren't agreed upon. They may agree that China stole them or they're bad to be in China. We're not necessarily sure on how to bring them back. So you see that's kind of my concern, is saying, well, how would we work these problems out? But I do think it's something that the political elite will lean on for sure. And how it plays out at this point, we're so divided. I'm not sure if it will resonate with most Americans. What do you think?
Look, I say we sort of sign off on this show with the hope that if you and I and everybody else talking China can get the rest of the country to understand the challenge that China is posing on us right now and the urgency to address it. If we do that well, I do think we can succeed in finding something that both red and blue and every other color can agree upon to work together on to fix. And that is my hope. And maybe we set that as our goal for 2021 for you and I and everybody else that we talk to on this subject.
Yep. And as we said before, talking about it and thinking about it, nuancing it out, trying to tease it out, trying to think, what do we know? What do we don't know? And support from folks like Man United he's a good dude, is how we get there. So thank you everyone for tuning in today. We'll be back. I don't know, sometime this week, tomorrow, next week, something back and talking more China. I'm sure more will come out. And if Jack Ma wants to come on, we'll be happy to have him on to talk anything.
Yeah, exactly. And we'll post, and for people that have like all kinds of stuff going on in their everyday life, we'll be posting all these interviews so you can check them out later too. So you can catch up on this stuff at any time. Anyway, thanks so much. Have a great Monday, everybody. Ryan, always a pleasure.
Likewise, talk to everyone soon.